So I'm Dave Aronchick. I co-lead research development at Protocol Labs. And I'm probably unlike most of you. I am very new to the Web3 space. I previously led PM for Kubernetes. I helped found the Kubeflow project. So I really put together a presentation on the things that I have been learning over the past few months as I've come up to speed on this space. Because I'm telling you there's a lot. And especially for cloud native developers where you are looking at the majority of developers in the Web 1 and Web 2 worlds, this is something that I would have liked to see when we came through. Now, when you hear Web 3, oftentimes the first thing you do is hear, it's Web 3, it's inevitable, it's just enormous, it's coming. But there's not really a great answer as to why. You may throw out that question to the world and you'll get 700 answers, but they're all very, very specific to the use case and things like that. And so I think that there's a flow that people need to go through as they build their Web3 apps and understand exactly what they're getting in for and why they're doing it. So to start, I like to tell this story. Why would you want to get into Web3? So let's say you had an app out there in the world that you wanted to build. It was killer, it's globally distributed, has unprecedented resources and will affect everyone. And in order to do that, you have to do all of the things you see here. Source and provision resources, create mechanisms for sharing code, use internet standards for backwards compatibility, ship and maintain their apps in a highly leveraged way, so on and so forth. And there's only centralized services in order to achieve that. Does anyone want to guess the year of the stuff I just described? So, it was these guys, right? Anyone know who these are? So that's Google, right? That's the first version of Google. And they had to go and build Google, right? What did that involve? Well, the first thing they did was deploy a whole bunch of centralized services. And you can argue, especially if you know how Google is built, and they've been very, very public about it, they are one of the largest, quote-unquote decentralized apps in the world internally. There's no single points of failure. Every machine, every node, every compute operates on a zero trust basis, so on and so forth. And over time, they built that decentralization, but it all started from that centralized resource. And they didn't decentralize on day one. Now, the funny part is exactly what you said, everything old is new again. Over time, things have been progressing from very, very centralized, single things, vertical stacks, all of those kind of things, into far more decentralized things. And there are lots of benefits for that. Not just from a security perspective, from a fault tolerance perspective, reliability, performance, things like that. There's benefits to decentralization. That's really one of the core things that Web3 allows for. It allows for this very low trust environment, or zero trust ideally, with decentralization and resolving these things on each step. Now, I want to be very clear about these things. This is just my take on it. You can argue that on any given square, any column here, there are many, many technologies, many that continue to pursue to this day, but these are kind of like some ideas about what might happen. Web3 is really one path for what's next, and I think this is something that really only came to fruition for me, or understanding for me, as I dove deeper here. Like, there's nothing to say that you need to be a Web3 maximalist on day one. Can we get there? Can everything be Web3? Sure. But that's not going to happen tomorrow. And it's certainly, if we require that, that's going to exclude a whole bunch of Web 2 developers. So that's why. What does it look like? Well, so again, I come from the cloud native Web 2 world, right, of Kubernetes and other things like that. And cloud native apps are great, right? Here, in just 4 commands, I can spin up an entire stack of Web 2 workloads to provide a simple store, simple e-commerce, payment transactions, everything, storing state in a database, storing logs appropriately, so on and so forth. 4 commands. That's really pretty impressive. And I can even add that extra money flag there at the bottom to give me, make it extra profitable. But, are cloud native apps great, especially for the things that we care about? Well, to do those 4 things there, I had to rely on a whole bunch of external services, many of which I will not have audited deeply. I have to trust, for better or worse, these services to provide me reliable things, that they haven't been backdoored, that they are doing things that they say, that someone out there has done security audits on them, and so on. That's a lot. And so this comes to Web3's core thing. Who do you trust? And the ideal statement is no one. Except there's a lot to build if you're going to build a truly trustless app. And we're talking about reinventing everything back to the root certificates provided at your data center. I mean, it's just so much stuff. And so what I think the essence of Web3 is it allows you to choose who you trust. Now, like I said, you can do everything you saw there, right? This list is real, and there's probably even more than this. But I can say assuredly there's definitely more than this. But you can choose to say, hey, you know what? I'm okay. I'm going to have to trust Intel or AMD that they're going to produce a reliable CPU. Okay, that's something I'm going to trust. Or I'm going to trust my data center provider to not have the NSA reading my switches. Great, I'm going to trust that too. Regardless, what Web3 does is allows you to choose who you trust, but it puts the onus on you to choose wisely. And that's the key, right? You need to be able to swap that out if you decide that this is something that you no longer want to trust, that you're ready to take on that work. But like I said, make no mistake, the cloud native people who were doing it earlier, they're trusting a ridiculous amount of people too, but at the end of the day, they're able to deliver value very, very quickly, and they've made that trade-off themselves. Okay, so that's what. How do you go about Web3? Well, so let me lay out what that app looks like, that very simple e-commerce app. You have DNS, you have a front end that might have authentication, CDN, and search built in as separate services. You'll have a back end that has payment processing, state storage, and log generation. This is like 101 stuff. This is very, very straightforward things. Now the nice part is every one of those has a Web3 solution today, right? You can go out and do that. But if you do that, you can get very excited about it. If you do that, you're taking on all those workloads, and many of them may not meet exactly what you need, or may not be areas where you really care that much. Hey, you know what? For better or worse, I'm going to use Stripe because they've negotiated payment processing in fiat, all over the world. That's fine. At the end of the day, I have their throat to choke. If the payment processing doesn't go through, they're done. Or you could say, hey, you know what? I'm in a space where it has historically been censored or other things like that. I'm actually not going to trust them, and I'm going to figure out my own solution for that. That's something you can pick and choose. And the key is to pick and choose based on your needs. So like I said, every one of those can have a Web3 solution, but it's really up to you to make a decision on a one-on-one basis. So for example, let's say I need free immutable image hosting, right? You can use something like nft.storage. Let's say I want to improve my content delivery speed. I can use Cloudflare and their distributed web gateway, which already supports several browsers, Brave and others, to download content on your own. Let's say I need extremely large permanent storage. I can use IPFS. Publicly auditable DB for whatever reason. You can use OrbitDB. Or maybe I want to use edge deployments, I can use libp2p. And again, I'm just selecting in the things that I need. I don't have to eat the entire buffet at once. I can say, oh, you know what, it's brunch, I'm going to have a pain au chocolat. Okay, and I like to say this line as well, tech changes, people don't. And these are kind of my immutable rules of tech. We don't need to go through them because it's a very short time, but the truth is that people don't want to run their own infrastructure. This is Moxie's whole point. People want more control, they want to save money, and they want the easiest solution that solves their needs and no more. And these really are in stack rank order, in my opinion. For example, they will pay more money if it means they don't have to run their own infrastructure. And I think these kind of trade-offs are really true. And just because we're in this brand new ecosystem, I don't think anything has changed. I think Web3 is the same thing that we saw before, and it's just up to us to accept it or not. Okay. So finally, why again? So I showed how to set up a Web2 cluster before, a whole web e-commerce shop. In order to set up, for example, your own IPFS cluster, you can do that too. Here you can see I'm going to create a Kubernetes cluster on AWS. Here I'm going to install Helm on it. There are actually already Helm charts out there for deploying an entire IPFS cluster. I just searched for this one. There are many out there. I'm not endorsing this one or saying it's not bad. I just don't know anything about it. But at the end of it, I actually ran this, and I have set up my whole IPFS cluster for commands, just like before, right, in the Web 2 world. That's pretty impressive. And there are lots of things out there just like this. But again, it's really up to you, because for you, does that make sense? Does it make sense for me to run my own IPFS cluster? I don't know. Do you have privacy concerns? Do you have needs to ensure that you have reliability and can restart these things or so on? Or can I rely on this global network that's going to take care of everything for me? I personally am okay tapping into everyone else and using my own authentication, but many people have different security profiles and things like that, and so we'll leave it up to them to make those decisions. Should you endorse or embrace all of Web3? Really up to you. Many platforms out there, you've seen some already today, and there will be many more later today, have JavaScript and Node and Python frameworks that allow you to plug into many of these components in your standard Web 2 stack, yet still embrace a lot of Web 3 is. Again, that means you're trusting someone else, which is critically important. Some people are okay trusting someone else for these various components, using things like HTTP gateways or translations or bridges. Some people say, you know what, I need to run this entire thing myself, and that's important for me to deliver value to my customer. And then you'll run your own nodes, and you'll spin everything up, and you'll cut the latest builds. Again, completely up to you to make that decision. I do really strongly suggest that Web3 is one tool in the toolbox, and it's built around flexibility, trust, and decentralization. And that's really the key. The number one thing that I walked away when I first began to consume all of the content around Web3 and people building apps and those kind of things is the idea that Web3's real innovation is around trust. It allows you to decide who you are trusting and why, and make that decision on a component, microservice to microservice, human being to human being, whatever it might be, basis. And that really is transformative. That's something that when we went back and you look at that Amazon spinning up an EKS cluster and that simple shop, you're not making any of those choices. You're just basically saying, hey, you know what, service provider out there, you just decide everything for me. And that may be okay too. There's nothing wrong with that. It's really up to you to make that decision. So, with that, that's me. Any questions, comments?